If you haven't started your agentic journey, you're already a little bit behind. So let's get into some of the details. What are the analysts saying? What are we seeing in the streets? And what is the market telling us? All right, so always starting off with facts. By 2028, Agentic AI will autonomously make 15% of day-to-day work decisions, fundamentally changing how organizations operate and compete. So that's not just infusing technology, fundamentally changing, reimagining the way that work is done, reimagining the way that business units are operating together. The silos of data are no longer going to be acceptable. It's not going to be okay for procure to procure without understanding what pay has to do at the end of that cycle. They must work together autonomously and agentically. We seem to be the ones that take on the evolution of automation in finance because it's important to see that the piecemeal of understanding these technologies has advanced the way that humans have interacted with it. Now, 20 years ago, if you had told somebody that they were going to be using AI, it probably would have scared them and they would have shown you a pivot table instead, or figured out how to get a macro to work. And that's what we see here with the evolution. Always with the paper-led accounting. We're going to talk about that with Hitesh a little bit too. He's going to share some stories from the field. But as we move along, what we see is that it began to be about structuring data. And that's the thread that you can see through every form of transformation, especially now that we're getting into AI. In fact, most of the programs that are failing today are not because of the technology itself, not necessarily because of the user, although that tends to be a challenge sometimes, but it's usually about the underlying data. And it's about not having the access or the accuracy that must be had to make sure that these decisions, discernments, and that the agent can continue operating rules-based and ultimately with agency, with thought. Now that we're in the space of intelligent automation, which is where I met UiPath, which is where my automation journey started with them, about 10, 12 years ago, we were still explaining what RPA was. We were still explaining that you could modulate little robots in your desk, and we were having trouble kind of explaining how these worked, but software robots can, in essence, do what your macros could do. And so the business began to take notice and be autonomous and not have to go to IT every time there was something that had to change in their back office or anytime a vendor approached them with a new technology. There was more autonomy. Now the CFO, now the finance department, now the business leaders could really take control of the finance decisions around technology. We've seen this kind of explode over the last several months and years, and I'm sure even in your personal lives, you're seeing the way that AI has completely taken over how it is that you interact with vendors, how it is that you talk to customer service, and maybe even how you do your groceries. So when we talk about the evolution, it's really important to kind of look at the tech environment too, right? So there's some bespoke stoic systems that I think are always going to kind of be around. Some version of an ERP, although it could get completely exploded because the consumption of data that an agent can have is far more than any human. But there's definitely different areas that we're not going to talk about today displacing necessarily, but just reimagining, right? And looking at the tech environment, it's really important that we're trying to see where agents can come in and truly help from a perspective of governance. And again, getting the tasks done faster, more accurately, that's one part of it. But ensuring that it's compliant and adheres to the processes of your organization and the policies that you've established, that's the most important part. And that typically lands squarely with the finance department to ensure that compliance is adhered to, especially with all the sensitive data. So some of the ways that agents are beginning to come into finance are some of the areas that you typically tend to think. Some of the manual repetitive work, some of the areas where it used to be easy to kind of pull things from different systems, but mostly in the great orchestration of data. And we're really seeing a lot of value in organizations that maybe traditionally did outsourcing, and now they're not having such a black box moment with lack of transparency or visibility into their data. You're able to make real-time decisions, not just look on the past, right? Not just redo the books and assess what happened last year as a means to forecast for this year. There's real-time KPIs, indicators, different elements that we can assess along the way, giving us real-time data to make actionable decisions, to make the decisions as fast as the market is demanding. several use cases across finance and accounting. We'll send some of these along and we'll ask Hitesh to share some of the ones that he's been part of. But for the most part, we're really seeing folks begin to adopt agentic in some of the areas that they've traditionally tried to tackle, and really just either ripping and replacing or augmenting and infusing the areas where maybe throughput wasn't high enough, where maybe there was a lot of exception handling that had to be manually programmed and considered in legacy RPA. So some of the workflow automation that's happening is just accelerating what was done in the past. But we're also seeing all kinds of brand new ways that finance and accounting is interacting with sales, with marketing, with attribution to how leads are coming in. You know, the use cases are endless when we can access data at scale. So humans and AI better together. Of course, we're going to think that. But I think it's important to know that we also don't believe that humans are completely obsolete in this. As an AI firm, I think sometimes people think we're just trying to replace all the humans, and that's absolutely untrue. In fact, the importance of the human, understanding how to interact and react to the changes that this technology is going to make into day-to-day workforce is more important than ever. And leaders like Hitesh, partners like Wonderbots, we're the ones that can help guide you, give you the structure to get started in a way that makes sense for both the humans and the AI agents that you're going to onboard in your organization. We like to look at some of the areas where it can improve, and Hitesh will touch on some of this. In our prep, we talked a few of the areas where it's still important to have, oversight, making sure that things aren't completely autonomously done, some of the strategic decisions. But ultimately, again, with data being the foundation, by having that structured area and that place where you can truly orchestrate and see all of your repository of data, your system of record, perhaps your GL is, you have 3 or 4 different GLs, across the globe. Maybe you had you acquired a company that had a different ERP system, so you're still maintaining or managing 2. All of these different areas where siloed data is, these are the areas where we can actually pull in and have a little bit more access and control over those processes. So as these agents come in, they're able to accurately depict some of these areas, right? So role-based access, they're able to look at continuous controls. Some of the things that maybe we only do monthly because of bandwidth, it's able to be done weekly. So it's really about reimagining the possibility of what an agent can do, the sleeplessness that it requires, and the ability for the humans to be able to interact and give that tribal knowledge to really make it effective. So what do CFOs, chief accounting officers, leaders in finance have to think of? Stay curious, move early, experiment responsibly, and accept iterations and failure. Because what we don't want to say and we don't want to proclaim is that this is easy peasy 1, 2, 3. There's a lot that needs to be taken into consideration when beginning an agentic journey. But once you understand the fundamentals, the sky's the limit. And with that, I'm going to ask Hitesh to join me for the panel discussion portion of our webinar.
Thanks, Paula, and thanks for having me here.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so excited to have you here. And some of the things that we've been talking about over the past, 5-10 years haven't changed much at all. And then some of the things we've been talking about in the last 2-3 weeks have changed exponentially, right? So there's still this increasing need to find cost savings and efficiencies, right? I think that's the standard, but also trying to modernize and figuring out a way to stay relevant and not get left behind in this age of agentic. So what are your thoughts and your experience, over the course of your career? What do you think has changed just absolutely dramatically? And what fundamentally of the function of finance and accounting remains true to the humans who created it?
Yeah, it's a interesting question. Actually, it brings me back to my early career. In fact, I was inspired by one of the slides that you highlighted earlier, where you said pre-90s people used to, work on paper, and it resonates with me because that was the fact pattern when I started my professional life as a chartered accountant. We used to go while we were going to our audit clients. We used to start. Go to our office first and get some forms. This is called as F7 forms or F11 forms because the forms had seven columns or 11 columns. So it's interesting that if I maybe dating myself back right now, is that's how I started. And then we, moved to very quickly where we started bringing, larger laptops to our client sites and, do or conduct our work in that. And then it evolved further into Lotus notes and then into Excel and macros, as you rightfully said. So what we have seen is we as humans have consistently seen a significant evolution in how work gets done. And enterprises are really great at embracing this change and making sure they are adapting to it contemporaneously, figuring out how processes, are supposed to be carried out and how technology was helping them. Having said that, what is now happening is a very substantive change. And why I say that, because if you think about the work that is happening in an enterprise, the production lines were always going through some level of automation, but there was always a viewpoint that humans are integral part of that production line. So the enterprise workflows were always designed with human first as a mindset. These humans were getting, technology help in form of maybe Excel macros, as you said, or, Power BI or, Tableau. And so as you've seen that evolution. But what is now happening as a substantive shift is the thought process evolving from human first to AI first, but human governed. So, and that is where the principal shift is happening in the ecosystem, which is allowing companies to rethink their internal processes, saying, if I were to go back and redesign this process with an AI first mindset, how would this process look like? Does it have to be sequential? Does it have to be parallel? Or can there be a hub and spoke model where all the data and documents are ingested and then the processes are, consuming that information contemporaneously? And therefore, that actually allows you to do many more things with a higher quality, much faster than what you did in past. The other part of your question is what remains same. That's an interesting element because as long as customers or your regulators or your investors, as long as they continue to hold human accountable, that human accountability is still there. I cannot build today an autonomous enterprise and say that, okay, if something wrong happened, AI was responsible, I should not be blamed. If some cash went out the door, AI was responsible, or if some customer churned, AI was responsible. Accountability still today lies with humans, and that is why human in the loop is an important fact pattern, and a human led to human governed is still an important fact pattern. So our viewpoint is enterprises will evolve as the next interim step to agentic environment, and from there it will potentially lead into autonomous environment. But to get to an autonomous environment, you need to make sure regulators are also, coming up to speed, and they are also evolving so that enterprises can truly operate like an autonomous enterprise.
No, that's a really good point because the function and kind of the regulatory body has to catch up too. And that's one of the things we're seeing is that organizations haven't even put into place an AI policy or a governing document that includes some of the elements that maybe they hadn't foreseen, when those were originally written. Now, as a steward of finance and being very mindful of cash, being very mindful of money in your job in general, how would you advise somebody who's maybe already spent, who's maybe already invested since the 90s in outsourcing, perhaps, right? We have organizations with legacy examples of several attempts. How would you, since this is fundamentally changing, this is a true shift, are we at a moment where you would suggest truly etch-a-sketching, erasing, revisiting, looking once more at what your spend is, where your vendor allocation is? How would somebody justify starting a new agentic program if they've been on this road for 10, 12, 15, 20 years?
Yeah, and that is a very relevant question, especially as companies are thinking about, okay, we have our top three priorities is to, infuse AI. If you are a technology company, infuse AI in my product offering. If you are any other company, infuse AI in my operation somehow. So I think that is number one priority of the top three priorities almost every company CEO has today. But then the question is, how do I go and fund that? I didn't have any budget sitting around last year, and I see that cool stuff is there. So When we internally, even at UiPath, when we thought about this concept, our first point was how can you self-fund it? First, there is no argument or debate whether we need to do it. We have to do it. That is there. And once you decide you have to do it, how am I going to find that resources? So, and it is relatively easy, first and foremost is if you believe everything needs to be AI first mindset, then what are the new open job recs I have? Do I need to go and fill those needs? Or first, should I pause and figure out what is the potential I have, what I can build? And when I am able to build there, what natural synergies will emerge from that? Basically what type of layering am I and I need to have, because I don't need to have a preparer, reviewer. Can I just have one preparer and one reviewer and one owner, something like that? So you can think about the number of layering you have. When you start thinking about it that way, what you will realize it is, for most part, you will be able to identify and self-fund it through the transformation that you'll experience. Now, you have two choices. You can go and first say, okay, I can maybe take certain decisions and then transform, or you can say, maybe I want to transform first and then take some decisions. And you have to go with, what naturally makes sense to you and your respective enterprise. From our perspective, what was very important was we had to embark on this journey as a starting point, and we needed to make sure that we are learning from this experience very quickly. And it was not just continue to build more automations or agentify the business. We also had to make sure that there is evolution in other areas of the world that is also going to have an impact. For example, CIO organizations historically were more focused on buying, enhancing, and operating. We think that organization will evolve. Now they will be building more and enhance and operate. So maybe there were certain applications in past which were purely focused on, let's say, BI type tools or workflows. Those can be very easily be built independently. So you will see that you can shift that initiatives from, instead of me continuing to spend money on an application I was buying, maybe I can go and build more. There is also this concept of, historically there were a lot of budgets that were incurred because folks were getting under the hood and customizing a lot and creating a lot of technical debt. And for example, the system of record, you call it SAP, you call it Oracle, you call it anything, right? Lot of internal customization that was happening in the systems. And that technical debt required a lot of complex talent on board, or a lot of spend with SIs, so that we can continue to maintain that technical debt. Now, what is happening is, with this evolution, you have opportunity to minimize that technical debt. And so you can say, instead of me continuing to build more on the system of record, can I keep the system of record clean and then create something called a system of engagement? That system of engagement can be an agentic environment, an orchestration environment. That's where the future, knowledge workers, whether it's humans or agents, will interact. That will become the new system of interaction, while the system of record will stand underneath that. And when you go through this in a very comprehensive fashion, you will realize that you are repurposing your spend from place A to place B, and it will free up the right funds, so you can go and invest in your AI agentic program, in your build program. And also it will give you more clarity on your future of talent, which will allow you to build a truly agentic enterprise for your future.
I love that. I love the system of engagement. I absolutely love that. Something that you said was making me think too. Several of the folks that had registered for this webinar were COE leaders, surprisingly, as finance and accounting. But COE leaders, and often, we see that if they're in charge of a center of excellence, they sort of have that burden of figuring out the funding, right? And I think we've taught them over the course of several years, that self-funding is the right way. You do have your innovation fund if you can find it from somewhere. But what would you recommend to a COE leader, maybe trying to advance themselves into the world of AI, reimagine themselves in their own career, if you will, in partnering with the chief accounting officer, or with the CFO, to really look at the schematic of all the spend to get it right? We've seen a lot of that kind of happening. Do you have any thoughts on that? Recommending kind of how to partner with finance to get smart about this?
Yeah, I think one important point is, the COEs were focused on solving rule-based problems historically. Rule-based problems are still relevant, and we still believe deterministic technology is the right way to solve rule-based problems. That gives you the highest degree of assurance, and that also gives you the lowest cost to operate. So then it is no brainer that deterministic is still relevant, and therefore whatever the COE teams have been doing, that is very valuable for the respective company. Now, in that fact pattern, they have to continue to demonstrate that ROI, because that is a real ROI. Now, there is a hypothetical view on ROI when you start thinking about agents and agentic. But the concept is very similar. In a deterministic world, you are emulating human behavior to solve rule-based problem. In an agentic world, you are still emulating human behavior but to solve a cognitive problem. Now, interestingly, this cognitive problem has more than one possible outcome. And therefore, the level of confidence is not as much, and it is powered by a cognitive model where you have a higher compute cost. So the ROI demonstration becomes very difficult. Now, if you take an equation where you take an end-to-end process, in that end-to-end process, you can say these are my rule-based steps and these are my cognitive steps, and this is where I need human in the loop. The extension, the COE has a natural extension to play part in the cognitive element of that process. They can say, if you now transform the entire process with a combination of the deterministic problem, agentic problem, there is a more broader ROI. If you say that I'm going to leave my deterministic world, I'll migrate to agentic, you cannot demonstrate ROI. And vice versa, if you say I will not do anything agentic, then you're not using the newer emergence in technology to continue to transform yourselves. So I think it's a natural extension that needs to happen. What is happening in lots of enterprises right now is the AI initiative is tasked to someone else apart from the COE. So either companies don't have an AI rhythm or they have AI rhythm which is independent. As long as that AI rhythm is sitting with within the COE, there is a natural upskilling that they have to do to make sure that now they are able to solve the whole thing versus just a rule-based problem. But to the extent if it is in parallel, they have to figure out a way to partner with those other departments. That's step one, because enterprises will derive full ROI when these two groups will work together and make sure you actually transform an end-to-end process. Then the next question is for the COE itself, what is it that they need to do differently so they can upskill themselves? And I think this is where the lines between COE, the lines within the CIO organization, and if it's a technology company within a product and engineering organization, will start blurring now in the world where we live. This is where you will see that they will all, in its end state, plain English word, will end up becoming builders, right? Those builders can build an automation, can build an agent, can build an application, and they are able to build with different kinds of tools that are available to them. Those tools can be in form of loosely coding agents. You can use a coding agent, which is nothing but you can do white code an app. You can use coding agent to build an automation. You will be able to use coding agent to create a process orchestration or even build agents for that matter. The question is, how do you do it in a fashion which is enterprise grade, which allows you to make sure that the CFO organization and the CEO organization can comfortably rely on, whether irrespective whether the underlying problem is a rule-based problem or a cognitive problem. So I think this is where in my mind the COE organization has to evolve and go beyond the traditional RPA development and say, now I have capability to understand what are the dynamic with agentic, because there's different kinds of variables. What's the dynamic with building a homegrown application, and how can we integrate, because you need to have the same rules of the roads, the same framework. It has to be enterprise grade. And so how can we move from left to right, and folks who are on the right, they have to move to the left so they can come in the middle and be together. That's my current thinking.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. And I think it's important to note that the deterministic isn't gone. We're still, RPA is still flying off the shelves. We're still, installing every day because there's still, in fact, I think as AI continues to structure the data, there's more deterministic rules that we're uncovering that we were unable to have in the past, again, because of human limitations. So there's a lot of really cool things bubbling up. And I think the important thing is to have a sound place in the financial understanding. And for COEs, I think especially our clients that are in that role, it's to understand that the role always was to work with every business unit, right? And so the challenge might be, if you'd only been traditionally working with finance and accounting, tap on your vendor's shoulder and say, hey, let's go talk to procurement. Hey, let's go talk to HR. Hey, let's go talk to, these other areas of the business and see where we can connect that. Because those organizations that have that true connectivity of understanding the business processes across the board, I think are the ones that are going to be ripe to evolve into that agentic space. I totally agree there. But again, deterministic, still here to stay, still here to play. still paying the bills. So it's still an important part of the mix. One of the things we talked about, Hitesh, and I think you're uniquely suited to talk about this too, with some of the agentification that you guys are talking about doing internally. And I do want to touch very quickly, I know it's so boring, but the policy portion of it, right? And just kind of thinking of the governance and the framework. So as an agentic company, as a technology organization, you guys have to lead by example a little bit with that too. And I know in a lot of client conversations, they ask, well, what did you do? How did you do it? So if you could share a little bit about how you guys put your policy into place, how it is that, for example, if you're OpenAI or a Claude, shop, how do you get that enterprise there? What is the leadership motion in preparing for an AI enterprise?
I mean, for us, it is very clear, because we are an automation company to start with. The tone from the top is very clear. Is we are always on the front end of the curve. We want to make sure that we adopt fast, we learn from it, we share our learnings with our customers, with our partners, so that they don't have to make the mistakes that we are seeing, and they can basically they can get a better head start from an ROI perspective. And so with that mindset, we were always of the viewpoint that we want to make sure that we are drinking in our own Kool-Aid, and we are able to create some good assets which also can be used by our customers as well. When Agentic was launched around last Q1, just so you know how we actually transform that in practice in real life, we announced that we were going to tie our senior employees, their compensation, to agentification of our own company. And we basically said it in two parts. One is, how many ideas can be contributed? So we had a goal for that. And then what percentage of those ideas can be put in production? And so when you link it to incentive like that, it became amazing, because the output was within the first 1 quarter, 3 months, we saw more than 600 ideas in Automation Hub across the company, not just finance and accounting organization. We had ideas coming from sales and marketing, and from our CISO organization, our product support organization, our legal team, our accounting team. Across the board, we have ideas that came within 3 months. We had more than 600 ideas. And so now we have a different problem, that we have 600 plus ideas and we need to put them in production. And how are we going to line up? So of course, we started working with our partners. We made sure that, and internally. So that was an opportunity for our partners to also learn with us, and opportunity for our internal COE also to learn from that process. And what we noticed, so we have in its end state, we have more than 60 agents in production at the end of the previous fiscal year. I think my current data set may say we have more than 70 agents are in production right now. And again, it is across the board. Around only 20 are in finance and accounting organization. But what we've learned through that process is very interesting. We have certain agents which are doing personal productivity type of stuff. For example, allowing our treasurer to go and get insights into our marketable securities portfolio. And there are certain agents which are enterprise grade, which are kind of, taking care of our L0 support. For example, someone needs help with licensing. They would send a Slack channel, a request, and that Slack channel is fielded by an agent versus being fielded by a human. Ask legal. So instead of someone from legal team helping with an NDA or other documents, now an agent is helping. So we have those type of agents as well. We have agents which are doing helping us comprehensive solve our end-to-end finance and accounting process flow. And I'll give you a couple of examples there, where we, on a monthly basis, where we are supposed to review our receivables balances and understand whether we need to record a reserve for collectability type risks. That process, now we have an RPA automation that actually goes and extracts the data from the data warehouse. And then there is another rule-based automation that does the aging. And then it takes our policy into account and provides us a viewpoint as to what reserve should be done based on the aging analysis. And then we have an agent which then goes and looks at our another application which has all the information in terms of collectibility and interactions with our customer, goes through that application and advises us what special reserve is needed on top of the general reserve. And then it brings us in action center where humans perform the review so we can record the transaction. So that is in production, as I talked about. We have similarly in our quote to cash process, where contracts were historically reviewed by humans, and we have 12 micro agents powered by three different models, where those agents are reading and reviewing contracts, completing our checklist, which is sitting outside of the system of record. And then it takes the output and then it goes into an application, workflow application that we built on UiPath where the reviews happen. And then the final output makes its way into SAP. So front end of our code to cash process is transformed that way with a combination of agentic and traditional RPA deterministic automation as well, plus a custom app that is built on UiPath. So what it tells you is we have seen amazing adoption in all angles. The only thing which we did not do consciously walking in is we were not measuring ROI because our first goal was let's understand how this actually plays out in different scenarios. But what we're doing differently this year is now we are going after processes where we have an explicit goal, whether I want to compress my sales cycle in go to market, or whether I want to compress my closing period for in finance and accounting, or whether I want to make sure there is a lot of human effort involved and it is taking a lot of effort for us. We want to go and transform those. So we are going more consciously saying, why am I doing this and what is it that I'm expecting to derive? And so we are going it that way. But overall, a lot of learnings there in terms of agentification and how we should go about in future to make sure that we are also tracking ROI more carefully.
No, I think that's fantastic. And you own the COE too, right? Isn't that under your purview?
Yeah, so my scope is much broader than a traditional chief accounting officer,
Yes.
deputy CFO. So I have the CIO organization in my scope. I have the mid office, which is sales support, deal desk, deal hub, and also what do you call some of the professional services support. These organizations also roll up into me. So it's a much broader. So COE through that channel, of course, is sitting under me,
And making sure that the accounting is solved for all of the above is your task. Easy peasy. What I think is great about that though, and that's why I posed the question, is because the COE now maybe not having started with ROI. Of course, you're a technology company, so you have to dabble, and there's a certain element of throwaway, that happens when you're launching or testing out a product. So I understand that. But I think it's really interesting that they have you upfront and personal, right? And so this year you've taken a little bit more of a structured approach on how it is that you're going to go about it. And so that'll be really interesting to kind of see how those findings come. One of the other things that I think is so important to note here too is as we change things in the organization, as processes change, as the quoting process changes, as does the way our humans, our employees in interaction, right, with those technologies. So can you share a little bit about maybe the change management component of some of these optimizations? Has the team embraced it? Has this been something that people are more excited about maybe now than they were 10 years ago about some of the optimizations? Tell us a little bit about how everybody is adapting to these changes.
Yeah, I think we have a unique advantage because most of our employee base are automation first minded employee base, and they are generally passionate anytime a new product or a new opportunity comes up that will allow them to transform. They are jumping, and saying, okay, let me experiment with this. And so your previous question was your OpenAI shop or a cloud shop. We are agnostic, let's say that way.
That's politically correct, Hitesh.
Yeah, no, and that's factually correct as well. It's factually correct as well. We are agnostic because we want to make sure that we have all the models. One of the reasons why you would want to build automation or agentic on a platform like UiPath is that flexibility to have the right model for the right purpose on the back end. And that's why you don't want to get married to one particular frontier model, because who knows, in 3 months, maybe another frontier model may have a better output for the problem you're trying to solve. So, for example, I don't know if you caught when I said we have 12 micro agents powered by 3 different models, because we believe there are unique advantages. There are some models which are better at reading table, and some models which are better reading at unstructured documents, and some models which are better at decision making. So you want to make sure that you're using the right model to solve the problem in the right way, and you should have the flexibility on the back end to switch if you need to. So I think where I was going with that is our viewpoint was our employees are generally super excited when these new technologies come up. So everyone raise hand and say, okay, I want access to this, I want access to that, including some vibe coding tools. So we are generally generous about that. We don't limit our employees in terms of accessibility to the technology, but we are conscious about the fact that they are doing something meaningful with it, that the ROIs come. So we are consciously reviewing where is the token consumption happening, what is that person's actually going and building, is that what they're building has ability to be in production, can I generate some ROI there or not. So we do have governance around that, but because we are able to provide them all the tools and the fact that they have automation first minded folks, they are generally very much they are in support of automating and advancing that, and they're able to drive that within the respective teams as well. So whereas when I go and talk to some of my customers, most of the time that expertise sitting in the CIO, COE organization and not necessarily in the business. But I do think this will change, and business is now changing with, I call these models as personal productivity tools, because everyone is playing with these personal productivity tools. And so once people will realize the art of possible, they can then say, okay, I'm now open to have this infused in my enterprise process as well.
Yes, no, I completely agree. I think you have to see, taste, touch to sort of, get comfortable with it and then expand your mind. If you haven't ever had it, visually or anything, there's no way to have your imagination trigger everything that it's possible of doing. And I think we're seeing that too. And it's actually what's so interesting is that the context of folks, I guess later in their careers thinking maybe I'm too old for this, or my time has are the best prompters, are the ones with the most tribal knowledge and the ability to explain, well, if you go down that road, that's what's going to happen. And those are the warning signs that, that are so important to share and give to your leadership and the folks that are kind of devising these things now more than ever. And at the very least, use it to document all your processes. My goodness, if that's all you use it for, document your processes as they sit today. One of the other things I think that's so important to talk about too is this concept of outcomes. So you did say that now you're looking at this from the perspective of shortened close time or a tangible date that maybe a campaign can be shrunk to, or a total cost of vendors, used for an event or something like that. As those measurable, outcomes are becoming more important to the client, and we're seeing that a lot too. It's really about, we're calling it digital BPO. It's really outsourcing your processes to technology. And a lot of times they don't care if it's an agent deterministic, they don't care as long as it gets done. And so as we're seeing kind of this outcome based motion, going back to our paper trail of the early 90s, does this look like outsourcing? Is there a fear of potentially another black box or lack of transparency, with kind of having the data go somewhere else or have an agent take it on? Are there any things that you can foresee in that? And what do you think that the modern finance leader, these guys maybe that are graduating as accountants out of college, preparing their mindsets to be leaders in this space, what do they have to think about, as we approach that?
Yeah, so I don't think AI is going to take over the world. I think I recall maybe Jensen made the quote the other day. It's like, it's not about, you should not fear about AI taking over the world. You should fear about the folks who can work with AI. They will be taking over your job. So what it tells me is absolutely that everyone should figure out a way to start spending time and using this and say, how can I leverage this? I do think at the same time, humans are, their cognitive ability to reason with is of more relevance than it was in past, because now you are kind of fact checking your knowledge and completeness of your knowledge with an output that is coming from an AI, so that decision making for an enterprise is more comprehensive, more complete, and a higher quality decision making. In my mind, that is the foundational. So folks who have had enough experiences under the belt, they should feel great about it, because now they have another tool that's further validating. And there are times, actually, it happened to me firsthand. I'm like, man, I can't believe this piece of document that the AI produced is exactly how I was thinking of, organizing myself in terms of how I would want to operate in certain situation. And it kind of validates your thinking, and sometimes it also inspires you, saying, maybe have you thought about two other things that you need to think about. So that is number one in my mind, is making sure that you're leveraging that. The other piece there is to make sure that when enterprises are thinking about infusing agent in a process, there is a concept of enterprise grade agentic. And there, I think it kind of clarifies where you want to use vibe coding tools versus enterprise grade tools. And the differentiation is an agent has four different variables. You have a prompt, you have context, you have evaluation sets, and you have models. And these four variables can, one way or the other, have an impact on the output. So, how do you make sure that you have visibility to these four variables, controls around who can go and manipulate these variables, why it was structured that way, and what is the output of that, and then designing controls around that, that it becomes auditable. If you cannot do that, then it becomes your black box problem that you highlighted. Man, I gave something and I got an answer. I don't know what's happening behind the scenes, but I got an answer and I'm going to rely on the answer. Well, that is not enterprise grade. You cannot get, that's not auditable. Can you get to that? Yeah, because you can build a vibe coding application infused with agents, but you don't know what are the four variables I highlighted behind the scenes, and that becomes problematic. So balancing for what purpose you're using which solution and which technology is very important. If you're trying to solve an enterprise grade finance accounting problem, you need enterprise grade solution with the right level of observability and auditability. If you're trying to solve maybe content creation and the risk is relatively low and you want to move fast, or trying to solve user experience, you can use vibe coding, because then you get a first view very easily, and then you can go and convert that in an enterprise grade. So I think people need to understand, what is it that you are trying to derive by applying a particular technology or a solution, and whether it is needed to be an enterprise grade or not, and then you go from there.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. And again, it goes back to the policies. So any legal department, I think that's our next webinar next month. They're the ones really fighting to get that in place. And you mentioned auditability, and I think we'd be at a loss or at a miss if we didn't talk about, the auditability. One of the things we used to talk about with legacy RPA that would always delight finance leaders, especially in mid-market, was the ability to do the paper trail, right? So the robot would give a very detailed account of everything that it did and where it got stuck, or maybe the outliers and where the human picked up. And so it was a beautiful little audit trail. Auditors loved it. They were very into it. There has been a little bit of fear. There's a few Gartner reports that came out in the last 6 months that I read that kind of made me chuckle about how there's a little hesitation on auditors using agents, which I think it's a ripe candidate for for them getting the deterministic rules in place. So how has your first quarter gone, or your second quarter, your end of year close, having the auditability come from a paper trail of combination robots and agents? How did that go?
Yeah, what is interesting, and I think it is a newer space, as I mentioned, the regulators are getting up to speed. For example, auditors, when they talk about internal controls, there is underlying framework called COSO. That COSO framework is getting revised as we speak right now. It has different elements to it. I'm sure as a result, the auditing standards which are laid out by AICP or PCAOB, they are also going to get revised. But ultimately, these standards go to always the black box question that you normally talked about, right? So understanding what is that variability factor, and how do you make sure that every time a fact pattern goes through that process, the output makes sense. Interestingly, in a rule-based automation or pro-coded automation, it was always binary output. You either know it works or it breaks. And if it works 100% time, it works because you ran through 100 different user acceptance testing, and it always shows you that it works. And therefore, everyone agrees this is fantastic. The problem with a probabilistic technology to solve a cognitive problem is it may give you different answers. Having said that, I think the word hallucination in my mind is now a word of history, because the models have advanced so much that the quality of the output is really on par. It's really very good. In fact, in a lot of cases, better than what humans can also provide as an output. I think until the regulators are not going to allow, or until they continue to focus on humans for accountability purposes, there is an inherent expectation that an agentic output is still reviewed by humans for accountability purposes. You can infuse materiality concept and say, where is it that I want to put my head at? Do I need to look at everything? And then as more and more transactions go through, you will see that the output quality is good. Now, I'll also want to maybe double click on something I highlighted earlier. I said I have 12 micro agents which are performing revenue contract review. That was by design. Why 12 micro agents and not one macro agent? Because when you build a macro agent, the output quality will compromise because you're asking too many things of an agent to go and look into it. Versus when you build 12 micro agents, you're saying, look into this contract for whether it has a termination for convenience clause or not. Then it's going with one singular viewpoint. The output quality is better. So when you design these agentic solutions, you have to find that right balance saying, I want to make sure the response quality should not be compromised. And also figure out a way that I want to make sure for these items, the agentic output has to be reviewed by a human who has the right competency and skill set to reason with the output. And then you are saying, okay, as a result, I can still have an internal control environment that is operating effectively and I don't need to worry about material weaknesses or significant efficiencies. And then you say, I can demonstrate to you that I have a good understanding of the variables and have designed controls around those variables and they are operating effectively. If you can demonstrate this to any regulator who's working through it, they will be very relatively comfortable in terms of what you're trying to do.
Yeah, so they're comfortable. They used to be excited, so we have to get them excited again that there's ultimately going to be accuracy there. And so one of the other things that I was going to ask you too, in kind of taking a look at this and some of the client sites that you visited, for example, what are the hesitancies that you see this year versus last year? And an example, last year it's not going to work. Hallucinations, big word, big buzzword last year. This year not so much. More like, how do I pay for it? What do I do? What happens when they go rogue, in my experience. So in your conversations with clients, especially the early adopters, the ones that always come to the table and say yes to the first thing, what are you seeing as far as the difference in the launch of Act 2 of UiPath of Agentic last year versus this year in adoption, understanding, and the questions?
Almost substantial number of my client meetings, I would not say there is hesitancy. I think the product and the solutioning of process transformation is resonating with the customers extremely well. What is happening is there is still some confusion in terms of what is the right potential solution they need to use. And as I mentioned, in some instances, this is tasked to an AI organization. An AI organization don't think that deterministic is a sexy or a great way to solve a rule-based problem. So I think they are trying to make a case, and I think that's where customers are struggling in my mind. Once people accept that I have to transform a process and process as concept of rule-based problems to solve and a cognitive problem, and regulators still require human to be in the loop, and I need something to orchestrate this process, then I think it becomes very natural. I think because they are still experimenting, there are two things that's happening in my mind. Personal productivity, how does personal productivity help transform an enterprise? That is creating a lot of confusion. And second is agent and orchestration of agent is only the focus versus orchestration of entire process. So I think this is the two things. And the third part, naturally, in any organization is how does this all mean for an ROI perspective? The funding question that you initially asked. When you solve these three things, I think it is a no-brainer that you need to go forward with technologies like UiPath to solve your end-to-end process transformation problem, automation problem, and the agentic problem.
Absolutely. And I think ultimately the ROI, it's going to be cost of business as usual. Eventually, it's not even going to, it's not even going to be anything other than that line item of human capital. It's just going to be another chunky one that sits right next to it, for the engagement, over time. But yes, we are still in the place of proving. We are still in the place of expanding and scaling and showing value along the way. But I agree, we're seeing more and more attempts at end-to-end process management and getting tripped up. That's why it's important to have partners. Agnostic is a good way to go with some of these things, because there's several tools. Everybody, nobody thought anything could be better than OpenAI, and now arguably, we have something that's challenging that quite head on. And so the other thing, I think, then, and we have a few minutes left. I have one more question that came in from here from the audience as well. But one last thing that I think you touched on a few times that I think it's important to note is how often do you guys check in on that initiative? You have your day-to-day job, and of course yours isn't the usual, just checking on the books, but you have the day-to-day job and then just checking in on kind of how these things go. What is the cadence? Is this a special project, the agentification of the organization? Do you guys meet on it separately, or is it infused into your day-to-day? When you're talking about marketing, you just talk about the agents too. How has it become part of the day-to-day infusion, or is it still kind of a bespoke project at UiPath?
Yeah, no. So when we started, we organized ourselves to make sure we create a small group of folks, including the CIO and the COE organization, and certain project managers, to make sure that we are interacting with all right functional leaders. And then we organize ourselves. When I mentioned we had 600 plus ideas, how are we going to prioritize? Because I could not say just because this department sits under finance and accounting that, hey, just focus on finance and accounting. I had to make sure that we look at the entire organization and prioritize it. It was dependent based on readiness of processes, how much documentation was already in place, if we had a viewpoint on future state and what we wanted to build, and then also understanding whether it was a true agentic use case or not, and that type of stuff. So we went through that process on what goes on the production line versus what sits in the backlog. That process and the operating rhythm, we created a separate special operating rhythm to make sure that we are not lifting our eye on the ball. We are really focused on that. And that rhythm is continuing, of course. Now we are jumping more onto, as I mentioned, ROI. So now instead of just saying what's the progress on build, I think the progress is, are you, whatever you build, is that been deployed? What's the outcome? Where are the efficiencies and all those things? So we have now even extended that further beyond just whether you build an agent or automation or deployed versus how it's being used and how it's benefiting you and what's the results and the outcome. So that's where we are going now.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. So the questions specifically for you is, what is the most important skill in a finance and accounting hire in today's world? And while you start answering that question, I'm going to flash the contact information here for Hitesh and myself, if you guys want to take a look at that, so that you can connect with him after the fact as well. So what would you say to that? What's the most important thing? If somebody's going to interview with you, Hitesh, what is that skill that just jumps off of the resume into the most important category for you today?
See, let's say 12 months ago, if a resume came to my desk, I would potentially see candidates in two categories. Someone who is way technically solid, like in a big four world, we call it national office material, like someone who is very technically competent. Or you get someone who is really great at process, understanding process, automation, a good operator. And I feel like the future is where I need a blend of both. So I would not put a significant underscore on technical ability as I had done last year, but I still want enough technical knowledge to reason with the output that the AI is going to provide them. At the same time, I do want great process knowledge who can now think about, if I am a builder, how am I going to build an application or design a new process? And so the combination of someone who can demonstrate to me that I have a great process understanding, I have a great technical understanding, and I always work with newer technologies. I'm so much comfortable with change. Those are the right resumes in my mind that I can completely say, okay, that's the person I want to work with.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree. I think the emphasis on technology has gone down a little bit more, and the need and requirement for the ability to communicate, to articulate well, to understand, to contextualize, to give meaning behind examples to, all of those elements are the things that, in interviews are just becoming so much more important, because that interaction is ultimately what's going to be important in the future of work. Well, Hitesh, we've come to the top of the hour. I just wanted to thank you so much. If there's any last parting words that you'd leave with anybody, any advice about how you use it in your personal productivity day to day, any blogs or articles or anything that you can suggest as parting words.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, lots of blogs and articles out there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of material. Definitely 100% don't sit on the sidelines. You have to start working with it, even if it means personal productivity, because that is what will tell you what's the power of it. It is real. Even if that means swipe your personal credit card, subscribe to this on your personal dime, go for it, because there is a meaningful shift in how enterprises are expected to operate. So everyone's jobs, whether we accept it or not, all the way up to the CEO and how they are expected to operate has changed, and it's changing, as I said. And do it not only for yourself, do it for your family members as well. So if you have kids at home who are growing, going to be in high school, make sure that you are bringing them contemporaneously on the journey with you, because when they will be ready to be employed, they will also face a different, enterprise that they'll be working for. The expectations are totally different. So make sure you bring your family through that same journey. Don't sit on the sidelines. And once you start experimenting it, that's where you realize the power of it, and you'll be able to contribute in meaningful fashion.
I agree wholeheartedly. Well, thanks again so much for the partnership, for the time that you've given us today. And thank you everybody for tuning in. Those of you who were not with us live, you will be getting your deck as promised monthly, as well as a link to the recording of this session. Thanks again, Hitesh. Thanks to everybody who produced this once again. And we will see you guys next month, I think for legal, but we'll confirm that on the follow-up. Thanks so much. Take care, everybody.
Yep. Thank you.